And basically what we're going to do is we're going to begin the discussion on how to discuss intelligently the beginning of the experience of what we call African American people, right? Now, everything we put on the board has a political implication to it, but I'm going to put a date on the board, 1619, right? Now, you want to be careful when somebody gives you a date, because that date has with it a particular angle that might not teach you what you need to know, right? Be careful with anybody or any source or any book or any topic that starts the conversation with 1619, okay? Because 1619 doesn't give you a better understanding of the events and circumstances that shape the African American experience, okay? We can start long before that with 1492, okay? Now, in the handout that I gave to you regarding the chronology of slave revolts, how many of y'all had that handout? I put it on, it's on Blackboard. Check it out, it's one of the handouts that I gave to you. I had a date there that was in the mid-1500s that identified a slave revolt that took place in the 1500s. So if you had slaves revolting, right, as early as 1500s, and there were slave revolts before that, then understand that 1619 may just be a footnote and not a beginning time, right? Now, when we began the conversation, 1492 is good. 1492 is a date associated with the expansion of European colonialism. Y'all say colonialism. Colonialism. Y'all say it again, colonialism. Colonialism. This word has more to do with the African American consciousness, the African American experience, more than any other word we'll come in contact with. People always say, how come you always talk about slavery, slavery this, slavery that? Okay, you'll notice I very rarely mention slavery. But I do mention what? Colonialism. Because the word, the definition of it, gives you a better understanding of the African American experience and how chronologically things have developed into what they are now. Okay? So when we talk about colonialism, I want to introduce you to The Colonizer and the Colonized by Albert Memmi. One of the things that he identifies is colonialism as a two-party system. There are two parties to colonialism. Okay? The first party is the colonizer, which in this case is the European. The second party is the colonized, which in this case is the African and other people of color. And other people of color. So what are the two parties? The colonizer and the colonized. Okay? And so understand that when you're dealing with colonialism, you're dealing with an invader, an intruder, and those people who are being invaded and intruded upon. All right? The relationship, okay, between these two. The relationship is one of exploitation. What does exploitation mean? When you exploit something. If you're being exploited, what does that mean? They're using your weakness against you. What else? They're making a profit off of your weakness. Right? And they're actually stealing something from you. It's actually a theft. Right? You are being robbed of everything that makes you great. Right? Your strengths are exploited. Right? Other people benefit and you don't benefit even from yourself. Colonialism is also a relationship of dependency. Now, in this situation, who is dependent on who? Is the African dependent on the European, or is the European dependent on the African? The European is dependent on the African. Now, we can ask that question today, who is dependent on who? Are the NFL players dependent on the NFL, or is the NFL dependent on them? You see? Is Capitol Records dependent on the rapper, or is the rapper dependent on Capitol Records? You understand the question? See, because you will begin to discuss to see if this relationship still exists. You see? You will begin to ask the question. We'll put a term up here that you may have heard but might not be familiar with, called Brexit. Y'all ever heard of that? How many of you have heard of it? You might not know what it is. Okay. Well, Brexit has to do with Great Britain leaving the European Union. Right? Well, the major questions that are coming up emerge because the British people discovered that they might not be in control of themselves. They may be responding to other people. They may be exploited, and they may have other people that are dependent on them. Right? So put in your notes, decolonization destroys that relationship. If someone is getting paid and their only means of getting paid is through you, and you eliminate that, you cut the money off, those people no longer exist because their whole existence was based off of you. You see? So decolonization does away with the exploitative and dependent relationship. You're decolonized. One of my favorite authors, Frantz Fanon, A Dying Colonialism. He talks about how colonialism will end. Frantz Fanon was from the islands, Martinique, right? So he's talking about the Algerian Revolution and how the Algerians were liberating themselves from the French. But understand that colonialism has a two-party system. It's the colonizer and the colonized. The relationship is one of exploitation and dependency, okay? Now, there are three factors associated with colonialism, okay? And I want you to begin to ask the question whether these things still exist. The transatlantic slave trade ended in 1808. Transatlantic. So saying this is slavery saying that this is slavery, you say, well, slavery still exists. Well, legally it doesn't. The transatlantic slave trade ended in 1808. When did the slave trade in America end? When? 1865. And it ended with what? All right. Actually, the end of the Civil War. And the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and even then there's certain circumstances by which a person can be placed in involuntary servitude. What are those certain circumstances? Imprisonment. Felony conviction, and what's the other one? Treason. Do you know if you're a member of a street gang, you're considered an enemy combatant? Did you know that? Yeah. They can treat you like you're a member of Al-Qaeda. And if you're gang affiliated, they'll treat you just like you're affiliated with ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Did you know that? Well, all of it, look on y'all faces. All of that has to do with the ending of an institution called slavery, but I want you to pay attention to see if these factors remain, okay? The first factor regarding colonialism is the occupation of land. The Europeans came into West Africa and they occupied the land of West Africa. Over time, changed the very names of the places that they occupied. Those names had been certain names forever, but the Europeans come in They occupy the land not by force, but through this thing called commerce. Y'all say commerce. Okay? Let's do business together. Let's form trade agreements. Let's begin to exchange. Let's create some markets. Well, what the European has to offer the African are guns and liquor. You see? Now, that should be hitting home with some people. Guns and liquor. Now, you can purchase a gun for little or nothing in the hood. Readily accessible and available, but whoever gets arrested for illegal gun sales in the ghetto? When have you ever had apprehended a dude selling weapons out of his trunk in the hood? You see? Put this in your notes. And I'm going to have to charge you $20 for this one. You can pay me on graduation day. Because this you're not going to get anywhere else. Right? You're not going to get this anywhere else. But here, is that America looks at African Americans the same way it looks at Africans. Let me say it this way. American foreign policy toward Africa, American foreign policy toward Africa, American foreign policy toward Africa, and American domestic policy toward African Americans is the same thing. American foreign policy toward Africa, okay, and American domestic policy toward African Americans is the same thing. Which means that if America will do something in Africa, where else will they do it? In Give Village, in Cabrini Green, in Pork and Bean, in Jamaica Queens, wherever you have large congregations of African Americans, you're going to have the same obstacles put in place as African countries do. Because the person putting them in place arguably is the same thing. It is this European system. So you occupy land, do you do it by force? No. You do it by commerce. Right? Now here's the thing. What are the guns for?
Protection.
From who? When you start arming Africans.
Of the tribes, right? Of the tribes.
Okay, so if you have tribal warfare, you have areas where Africans now start fighting Africans. I have a book here, Chinala Chibi, Things Fall Apart. The reason why this book is so important is one of the books that identifies the time and place when Africans started killing each other. And he brings it to a tribal meeting that was being held to discuss how they're going to deal with these new people that have come into their region of the country. And the leader of the tribe, the elder, says, in times past, it would have been considered abominable for one brother to raise arms against another. But he says, now it is necessary. It is necessary for African people to start fighting African people because African people have joined the what? The colonizer. You see? You have to ask yourselves the question, have you joined the colonizer? And if so, how? You see? A very famous R&B singer had a song called My Colonized Mind. You see? He had no earthly idea that he himself was participating in the madness. What makes colonization so strong is the participation of the African in the colonizing. That's what makes it so strong. The reason why it has lasted as long as it has, because Africans themselves have found ways to benefit from it. Are you benefiting from your own enslavement? You see? Do you understand the question? You understand the questions we ask? A bunch of questions. In humanities class, we can ask questions. Yes?
I want to comment on that.
Go ahead, comment and speak loud.
You said like something about like commerce. Wouldn't like gentrification count as like
Gentrification.
Yeah, because you mentioned Cabrini Green earlier.
Yeah.
In Chicago was like mostly black, but now it's not. It's like all a whole bunch of white
Right.
Because my mama went to high school in like the neighborhood, but it don't look like that no more. And I think the people like own the buildings and own the land, they just offered a lot of money, so they just said, you see how you participate in like the colonizing like plan or whatever, like yeah you are, but you accepting the money instead of thinking like, oh I'm keeping my own land, keeping like the community going, and they just like.
Or here the thing is, or they never sold it to begin with. See, they just did nothing with it, right? When you look at some of the communities in Montgomery that are like dilapidated, right? You go and check and see who owns the property. A lot of times the person doesn't even live in the community. They left a long time ago, but rather than fix the place up or sell it, they just let it deteriorate. What they're waiting on is a market to change. There's a book I didn't have, I left it in my car, called The Tropical Dependency, which is a powerful book. The lady that wrote the book said, well, the reason why Europeans were so successful in Africa because Africa did not have any markets. So we created markets. Now, can you control an economy if you didn't create the market? You see what I'm saying? See, this is the breakdown of why things are the way they are. How can you control something if other people are dictating how much the dollar is worth? If they can tweak a Wall Street to go in a certain direction at will because they want to, if they can control the interest rates, how are you ever going to be able to take advantage of a what? A market. So you need to define, do your research on what a market is. You see, now you're getting an education, right? Now this is what, when you find out what a market is, then you will better understand the economic situation. But we put gentrification up here because gentrification is about what? Land, right? In my part of Macon County, where my friends own some land, white people in Macon County had this thing about never sell land to black people, right? But what I want you to do is I want you to ask your grandparents, if you got some old grandparents, I'm not talking about 50 years old, that's not a grandparent. I'm talking about a grandmama, or old grandmama, great-grandmama, great-great-grandmama. Ask them what happened to your family's land. Just ask them. Say, Grandma, Granddad, what happened to the land we used to own? Because African Americans used to own land, but what happened to it? It was stolen. It was taken. That was during Jim Crow. Jim Crow, putting in notes, is a microcosm of colonialism. You got slavery. After slavery, you got Jim Crow. But Jim Crow is a microcosm. Y'all say microcosm. It is a microcosm. It is a small part of colonialism. But the objectives are the same. You see? Ask your parents, your grandparents, how much land do we own? And if you don't, just ask them a question, what happened to it? Because great-grandmama, let me tell you, she might not remember yesterday, but she remembered 1930 very well. And she remember when they auctioned off your great-granddaddy's land because they say he couldn't pay the taxes or they killed him. That's a great study for Lowndes County. That's a great study for Lowndes County. So, because a lot of that went on. So you're occupying the land, and you're not doing it by weapons. You're doing it by commerce. You're creating markets, but you're also destabilization. That's when you get Africans to start fighting each other. You get them drunk, and then they start fighting each other. You create factions, and as those factions fight, you gain footholds and strongholds. You see? Let's put a name in the mix. Let's put Fred Hampton. Let's put his name up here somewhere. Fred Hampton. Have I told y'all about Fred Hampton? Fred Hampton was part of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. The brothers from California came up to Chicago to try to school Fred Hampton, and Fred Hampton ended up schooling him. Now, one of Fred Hampton's mentors was Dr. Bobby Wright, not Bobby White. Bobby Wright. He was from Hudson City, Alabama. One of the first black towns in America. Well, it's actually in Alabama, one of the first black towns. He was a psychologist. You can Google him, look at him on YouTube. He got some good stuff. I got a couple books behind Bad Brother. Basically, Fred Hampton talked about getting a political education. Fred Hampton started schooling the Panthers in L.A. Why do you think they focus more on the Panthers in L.A. than the ones in Lowndes County and the ones in Chicago and the ones in Milwaukee? Why do you think they only focus on that group? Okay, because they're targeted. Now, let's go back to, what did I say whenever somebody comes to you with 16, 19, what did I say for you to look for? If somebody gives you a date, they may be trying to push a particular angle, right? What year did ASU was founded? What year? But what if they only start the discussion with 1887? Why did they not want to talk about the beginning? When a family has a certain family history that they don't want to talk about, why do they not want to talk about it? Because it might be embarrassing. Sir? Exactly. Where they start and who they start with. And you'll notice there's some big gaps in history, in your history book. Big gaps. There are a bunch of questions that are not answered because they always provide the answers for you. They provide the questions and the answers, do they not? They don't let you critically read and ask questions because those questions will lead possibly to your greater understanding of things. You can take that information and actually do something with it. Fred Hampton said you've got to have a political education before anything else. This is why, and this touches bases with destabilization. Fred Hampton in Chicago called a truce with the gangs in Chicago. He called a truce in the gang in Chicago, and the police killed him because he found out that the gangs in Chicago were the police. They were fueling the feuds between the gangs for the purpose of what? Destabilization. Those gang members were becoming Black Panthers. You see? Fred Hampton said this. He said, if you don't give us a political education, Black people will replace white people in oppressing Black people. That's a heck of a statement, isn't it? He said, you will have Black people replace white people in oppressing Black people if they don't have a what? A what? A political education. You see? Vice Lords, Disciples, Blackstone Rangers, El Rukin, they make some good Panthers. Because they come out of one organization into another one. You see? They just don't have a what? Political education. They did when they got started, but those people were killed. You see? Those organizations started off as community organizations, but they got infiltrated. This same process began to take place. Guns and liquor, and now what you got? You got Black people killing each other. The property value in the community plummets. You see? But like she said with gentrification, somebody can come in and erase all of it. You see? Is that an accident or is that by design? See? Now you're understanding a little bit about this monster we call colonialism. So these are terms, Walter Rodney, put him in your notes. I hope y'all studied Fred Hampton and Dr. Bobby Wright. Walter Rodney, I don't have a book with me. How Europe underdeveloped Africa. Underdevelopment. You got people all over the country in urban areas. You ever heard of that before? Urban areas? What does that mean? You live in an urban area. You live in the inner city. What does that mean? What is that? Well, if you fall in that category, you are done. Nothing's coming your way. No changes are coming because that area is there for a reason. The way you keep people colonized is you just underdevelop them. And let me show you what underdevelopment is. You have a school. The school was built for 200 students, right? The school was built for 200 students in 1980. It is 1990, and you have not added one wing. You have not enlarged the lunchroom. You have not put more buses on the road. You have not increased the infrastructure as the population increases, right? So that school in 1980 was beautiful, it was perfect. But in 1990, it's a dump. Why? Because they did what? They underdeveloped it. They just did not allow it to grow as the population grew. It started off 15 kids per class. Now how many we got? 40. Can anything positive, except being in Dr. White's class, come out of 40 kids in a classroom? You see? So that's an example of what? Underdevelopment. So these are words, terms, and phrases that are associated with what? Y'all say the word. Colonialism, but does this still apply now? The names that I've given to you, put in your notes, Julius Malema, M-A-L-E-N-A. Julius Malema is a part of the South African land reclamation movement. Land reclamation. Julius Malema says, give us our land back. M-A-L-E-M-A. Julius Malema. He says, South Africans are about to take their land back from the colonizer. You got 72 hours to get out of town. If Israel want their land back, South Africans want their land back too. You see? So you have these things that are still taking place, and all of this is current. This isn't 1492, this isn't 1700, this is now. You see? Fred Hampton's body's still warm in the grave. Bobby Wright, Walter Wright, all these people, they killed him. Can you look up one day and you see Dr. White shot dead in the parking lot? Now, it will be because of something I told y'all. It will. It will be because of something I said. Because they put dynamite in this man's walkie-talkie. He's a history teacher. You see? But it was what he was teaching. You see? So you don't have a lot of people teaching this stuff because of what is associated with it. You can say slavery, 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 slavery all day. Ain't nobody gonna say nothing. But you say colonialism? You see? My little FBI friends are coming. Number 2, you exploit the resources. You exploit natural and human resources. Natural and human resources. That's point number 2 of colonialism. It is an exploitation of resources. What are some of the resources? Well, I'm glad you asked. Oil, coltan. Anybody know what coltan is? Cell phones and all that stuff. That's what y'all are addicted to. Coltan, bauxite, gold, wheat, uranium, diamonds. Do they have all of this in Europe? Cotton. What else? There's a bunch of stuff. Palm oil. More Africans died over rubber for tires, the rubber industry. It goes on and on. But all of this, Europe has been able to obtain for free. Now you tell me, that's how you get rich. Oil, coltan, bauxite, gold, wheat, uranium, cocoa. Ivory. So this is the breadbasket of the world. Okay? Now, point number 3 is probably the most blatant. The 3 factors regarding colonialism. Number 1, occupation of land. Number 2, exploit natural and human resources. Number 3 is imposed culture. The Europeans imposed culture upon the Africans. Number 1, their religion. If Jesus is white and your oppressor is white, somebody finish it. Jesus is white, your oppressor is white, right? Then Jesus is white. And fighting your oppressor will be like fighting Jesus. See? A people's aesthetic are those things that they consider to be beautiful. You see? And if white is beautiful and you're black, what does that make you? And if you're ugly, how are you going to act? A fool. Why are you going to act a fool? You see? You understand the questions? See, an aesthetic, put in your notes, is a people's concept of beauty. How they perceive beauty, the virtues of beauty. And if you're black and you think you're ugly, there's certain things that you'll never do. You worship your oppressor, which is not you. And the biggest form of flattery to your oppressor is for you to imitate him. Did you catch that? You flatter your oppressor when you imitate him. So how do you imitate them? You see? Understand the question? This goes back to, are you participating in colonialism? Have you participated in colonialism? People would say, well, my parents didn't own slaves. It's not about slavery. It's about what? Let's see how you benefited from colonialism. Let's see if it's still going on. What about the politics? What about the diet? My friends, Brother Antoine and Brother Herschel, were with me videoing. We watched a video in my office before we came over here on why African Americans should not eat dairy. And the fact that African Americans are eating and drinking a lot of dairy is causing a whole bunch of health problems. It's a biological, it's a physiological argument. But when you are eating the diet of people that are not from Africa, and your body is conditioned for an African diet, if there is a such thing, might there be some health factors involved in that? Okay. What about the language? This is a mess, isn't it? What about the language? African people, put in your nose Hector Peterson. Language. We got Fred Hampton, Hector Peterson, P-I-E-T-E-R-S-O-N. Hector Peterson. South Africa. Little boy. Killed in a race riot. He was killed in an uprising, if you would, because school kids his age wanted to learn in their own what? And not in the language of Europeans. So they resisted. They protested. They boycotted the schools. Now they really want you to learn something, put education. The colonizer really wants you to learn something if they'll shoot you for not going to school. Did y'all catch that? Man, they really want you to learn something. If you don't go, they'll shoot you. You see? Will the colonizer ever teach the colonized how to defeat them? So what will the colonizer teach the colonized? How to be colonized. That's it. Put in your notes, dual education system. Dual. Dual education system. Now I know this is a work of art, but I'm going to have to erase it. we'll stop right there. Dual education system. Okay? Dual, what does dual mean? You got one for who and one for who? Okay, let's take race out of it. You got one for the colonizer and one for the what? Colonized. The colonizer is taught what? What is the colonizer taught? How to lead, how to be a colonizer. The colonized are taught what? How to follow, how to submit. But never do the two interact where they're both learning the same thing at the same what? That's why integration didn't work. That's why integration didn't work. Put in your notes, Fred Gray, Attorney Fred Gray. There's a bunch of names on the board. Fred Gray. Fred Gray is the person that's probably responsible for what we call integration in America. Guess what college he graduated from? Alabama State University. Yeah, State. Man, State got so many graduates. Fred Gray was Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks' attorney. Fred Gray was also the attorney for the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. He also sued GM, got a bunch of money, for shortcutting black Cadillac dealers. But that's another story. We'll get him to come to the class and talk to you about that. But Fred Gray was the architect of integration, but what Fred Gray was doing, he was not doing it so blacks and whites could sit together all the time. He was doing it so black people would have a better understanding and a closer proximity to the knowledge of advancement. Which means if they were teaching something at a white school, a black student should not be denied access to that school to get that type of information. It had nothing to do with sitting next to a white person, but it had everything to do with that black person receiving the same experience, the same knowledge as the white person. Do we understand? Do we understand? It's hard to gentrify a community that's already got black people and white people living together. Right? You can't gentrify that place without hurting white people too. You see? That's the logic behind integration. All right? So, we got a little bit of everything. We got the three factors. What are they? What are the three factors of colonialism? Occupation of land. And number three is what? All right, now put in your notes Haitian Revolution. I'll tell you. Haitian Revolution. Because you have all three of these factors involved in revolution. All three. When you study the Haitian Revolution, you will see mulattoes and purebred Africans overcoming the social distance that the two had to defeat the French, the Spanish, and the British. They took control of the land, they took control of the resources, and they maintained a large portion of their African culture. And they're paying for it to this day. You see? Haiti looks like a ghetto because America's policy toward African nations is the same as America's policy toward African Americans. That is a historic observation. You see? That will support, let me give you this. That will support something that is important for us to understand, called the creation of the diaspora, the African diaspora. What is the diaspora? The boat ride. And that's good enough, really. I like that. Yeah. Who took the boat ride? Where did they come from? They came from West Africa. That hurricane did a number on a particular part of the African what? Diaspora. How did those African people get to the Bahamas? Did they immigrate there? How did they get there? They got there on this thing right here. The slave ship. They didn't take that wasn't a pleasure cruise.
Really?
Yeah. You know what that is. Everybody know what that is. You see them 3 masts, that's it.
Like a shoe.
Yeah. A shoe with sails. Yeah. Well, they got there because of the slave trade. That's how they got there. Right? How did they get there? How did they get to Haiti? How did they get to Cuba? Puerto Rico? Trinidad? Antigua? St. Kitts? Martinique? Bahamas? Virgin Islands? How did they get there? This boat. Now, I want to give you 3 points and then we'll quit. I know I've been saying that, but the same way they got to North America, they got to South America, and they got to the islands. The transatlantic slave trade. Okay? That ended in 1808, but they kept coming. They were smuggling them. But the population capital of the African diaspora is Brazil. How many of you have ever been to Brazil? There are more diasporic Africans in Brazil than in America. How many of you been there? Now, we mentioned Harlem. Harlem was, and probably still is arguably, but it's diminishing, is the cultural center of the diaspora. The cultural center. Which means that for a while, you had the broadest diversity of diasporic people concentrated in one place, and that was in Harlem. It may be Atlanta right now. I really don't know. It may be Atlanta. So culturally, Harlem was the center of the diaspora. Now, here's what we're coming to, so we'll quit. Politically, the islands is the center. It's the political center because a lot of your thinkers who were thinking about organizing African people in a political sense come from the islands. And I'm going to give you one name and then we'll quit. Marcus Garvey. Right? I'll give you another one. Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael's people were from Trinidad. Okay? All right, so we got that? That's what we're going to pick up on Tuesday. All right, see y'all later. Start me a roll, please.
We did that.
You did it? Well, I'll see you later.